In a bustling city, tucked away amidst the chaos, stood Greenfield General Hospital, a beacon of hope for many. To the outside observer, it was an establishment dedicated to healing and compassion. But beneath its polished exterior lay a troubling paradox that would soon unravel. This hospital, revered for its skilled medical staff and advanced technology, often found itself ensnared in the profit-driven motives that plagued the healthcare system. As the first rays of dawn kissed the hospital's facade, it marked the beginning of another day where the delicate balance between care and commerce teetered dangerously. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a deeply compassionate physician with an unwavering commitment to her patients, had dedicated years of her life to medicine. Every day, she walked the halls of Greenfield, witnessing the miracles of healing where patients would enter as fragments of humanity and emerge better, stronger, and whole. Yet, in recent months, doubts began to creep into her consciousness like fog, obscuring the view of a serene landscape. Something was amiss, and it gnawed at her very core. As Dr. Sarah moved from one patient room to another, the sight of Mr. Thompson, a once vibrant man now restrained by the sterile white sheets of a hospital bed, was an unnerving reminder of her growing concerns. He had been admitted with what should have been a minor ailment, yet weeks had trickled by with no improvement in sight. With each passing day, Dr. Sarah observed the hospital's emphasis on medical tests and extended treatments that seemed to prolong his stay. Salaries and profits loomed large over the institution, casting shadows on the oath she had taken to do no harm. An unsettling realization washed over her. The hospital viewed patients not as individuals deserving care, but as means to an end, profitable entities to be kept under its roof as long as possible. The more patients like Mr. Thompson occupied valuable beds, the more revenue the hospital generated from insurance reimbursements. Such a revelation sparked a flame within Dr. Sarah that flickered with a mix of outrage and despair. How could a place that vowed to heal prioritize profit over people? She remembered her medical training filled with the ideals of altruism, compassion, and the sacred trust between a doctor and her patient. But standing amidst the sterile halls and busy nurses, she began to see the cracks in the system. The dread of being complicit in this profit-driven machine gnawed at her conscience. On this day, she could no longer ignore the unsettling truth that was unfolding before her very eyes. Her path was set. She felt the weight of the ethical dilemma pressing heavily on her shoulders. As she prepared for her rounds, she reflected on this growing divide. Would she remain a silent observer in a broken system? Or would she muster the courage to stand up for the patients who were caught in the crossfire of profit and care? It was a question that would haunt her as she stepped into the next room, determined to uncover the truth and seek a solution, not just for Mr. Thompson, but for the countless souls entrapped in the suffocating grasp of healthcare commodification. Little did she know, this would be the start of a journey that would challenge her beliefs, pit her against powerful forces, and ultimately show her the true meaning of being a guardian of health and humanity. Dr. Sarah Thompson, a dedicated and compassionate physician in her early 30s, stood in the bustling hallways of St. Augustine's Hospital, tall and slender, with light brown hair that cascaded into soft waves. She exuded a quiet strength that earned her the respect of her colleagues and admiration from her patients. Every morning, she donned her crisp white coat, a symbol of her commitment to the Hippocratic Oath, a promise to do no harm and prioritize the well-being of her patients. From a young age, Sarah had always dreamt of becoming a doctor, inspired by the profound impact that medical professionals had on the lives of those around her. As a child, Sarah often watched her mother, a nurse, tending to the sick in their community. The warmth and healing her mother provided left an indelible mark on her heart. Thus, when the day came for Sarah to step into the role of a physician, she embraced her responsibilities with a fervor and fervent belief in the sanctity of healing. However, as she navigated her role at St. Augustine's, a prestigious hospital in the heart of the city, Sarah began to feel the weight of a conflicting reality. Despite her well-intentioned efforts to provide quality care, Sarah soon recognized an unsettling pattern within the hospital. The juxtaposition of her noble aspirations and the often mercenary environment of healthcare started to gnaw at her conscience. There were whispers among the staff about the hospital's hidden agenda, a focus not on patient care but on financial gain. Sarah witnessed her colleagues being incentivized to admit patients for longer stays, a troubling practice that transformed the healing environment into a profit-centric machine. Among the patients she treated, Sarah met Mr. Thompson, an elderly gentleman who had come in for a routine procedure. With each passing day, she watched him struggle not only with his deteriorating health, but also with the mounting financial burden that extended his stay. Despite her best efforts to advocate for his early discharge, the administration resisted, insisting that further tests were necessary to justify his extended hospital stay. It was a heart-wrenching situation that left Sarah grappling with her own morals. As time passed, Dr. Sarah found herself increasingly torn between her love for medicine and the systemic issues that clouded her practice. Her compassionate intuition clashed violently with the profit-driven motives of the hospital administration. With every patient who remained longer than medically needed, she felt her passion for healing dimmed, replaced by a creeping sense of disillusionment. The hospital, once a sanctuary of healing, felt more like a machine designed to generate revenue, an unintended consequence of a healthcare system gone awry. Amid the oppressive atmosphere, Dr. Sarah could sense that her voice was either muted or ignored by those in power, leaving her feeling isolated in her ethical convictions. Yet, as she looked into the eyes of her patients, she realized that she could not back down. A fire ignited within her, a determination to fight not only for her patients like Mr. Thompson, but for the integrity of medicine itself. As she began to pore over hospital policies and identify the root causes of these unethical practices, Dr. Sarah prepared herself for the turbulent journey ahead, where standing up for what was right could come at great personal and professional cost. With her unwavering resolve, she vowed to challenge the very foundations of a system that had reduced hospital beds to mere profit-generating units. Dr. Sarah sat in her office, her gaze fixed on the medical reports scattered across her desk. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, but the sound only heightened the growing unease in her chest. She had always believed in the Hippocratic oath, "Do no harm." Yet, as she flipped through the charts, she couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling that the hospital where she worked was straying further away from that fundamental principle. Every day, Sarah witnessed patients being admitted for minor ailments, only to be subjected to a barrage of unnecessary tests and extended treatments. The procedures that served no medical purpose were always cloaked in a shroud of professional jargon that obscured their true intent. It wasn't about patient care. It was about maximizing reimbursement rates from insurance companies. The hospital had transformed into a battleground where financial gain took precedence over the very essence of healing. One particular case stood out to her, a frail, elderly man named Mr. Thompson. He had entered the hospital for a simple knee surgery, but what should have been a routine procedure quickly morphed into a prolonged stay. With each passing day, the medical team added new tests, claiming they were necessary to ensure his recovery. Yet, Dr. Sarah knew that many were redundant. As Mr. Thompson lay in the bed, succumbing to the confines of the sterile room, he grew more anxious and frustrated. "Doctor, how much longer will I be here?" the soft-spoken man asked, his voice trembling. "Just a few more days," Sarah replied, forcing a reassuring smile. But deep down, she felt a knot in her stomach. Days turned into weeks, and while Mr. Thompson's knee healed, his spirit faltered under the weight of uncertainty and financial strain. It pained her to watch a life gradually overshadowed by the specter of profit-driven motives. The ethical dilemma loomed large in Sarah's mind. Should she adhere to the unspoken rules of her profession and look the other way? Or should she take a stand against the unethical practices proliferating within the institution? The weight of this choice settled heavily on her shoulders, leading to sleepless nights filled with self-doubt. Every time she walked through the hospital's corridors, she saw the faces of patients, grateful and hopeful, each one a reminder of the sacred bond between doctor and patient, now overshadowed by corporate greed. Her heart ached for those who found themselves as mere numbers in a ledger, their medical conditions exploited for profit. The hospital's management seemed prehistoric, their focus laser-like on the dollar signs that came from insurance reimbursements rather than on the holistic health of their patients. Patients were not just individuals with unique stories and lives. They had been reduced to tools for generating revenue. A voice inside Sarah urged her to take action. She recalled the passion that led her to become a doctor, the desire to heal and help those in need. With every report she wrote, she felt compelled to advocate for her patients, to reclaim the essence of compassion in medicine amidst a landscape of profit-hungry motives. The ethical dilemma was not just a hurdle. It was a call to arms in a fight for what was right. Sarah knew that the system required change, and she was ready to challenge it, even if it meant facing the powerful forces that sought to maintain the status quo. In the heart of the bustling hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic intertwined with the distant echoes of beeping machines and hushed conversations. Yet beneath this veneer of healing lay a disconcerting truth. The healthcare system was not merely structured to diagnose ailments and provide care. It was optimized for profit. As Dr. Sarah walked through the crowded hallways, her heart sank with each encounter that revealed the cruel realities of hospital policies. The hospital had mastered the art of maximizing insurance reimbursements, turning patient care into a balancing act of efficiency and profitability. Every bed occupied was viewed as an opportunity to generate income, and staff were encouraged to ensure that patients remained in their beds for as long as possible. Often, when clinical evidence suggested a discharge would have been more beneficial, Dr. Sarah remembered a poignant moment with Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who initially came in with mild pneumonia. After a week of treatment, he was stable and ready to be discharged. However, instead of sending him home, an attending supervisor insisted he stay another few days for observation. The reasoning was thinly veiled, revolving around the hospital's aggressive billing practices that prioritized financial gain over the patient's needs. Isolation turned to frustration for Mr. Thompson, whose health began to decline rather than improve. His family watched helplessly as he turned from a vibrant individual into a shadow of himself, shackled by unnecessary extension of his hospital stay driven primarily by revenue objectives. As Dr. Sarah delved deeper, she recognized a recurring pattern. Procedures and treatments that were often unneeded became standard practice, a tragic example of a healthcare system trapped in a cycle of profit maximization. The short-term financial incentives created a culture where physicians were inadvertently pushed to favor treatment plans that were more lucrative rather than those that would foster real recovery for their patients. Ethical boundaries blurred, and the sacred vow of "do no harm" became merely words etched on a wall. The statistics portrayed a grim narrative. Lengthier stays, surplus tests, and unnecessary surgeries were abusive to not only the financial structures of patients' lives, but also to the foundations of trust in healthcare relationships. Each dollar generated bore the imprint of human suffering. Every hospital bed turned into a component of an elaborate money-making machine. What should have been sanctuaries of healing morphed into profit-driven enterprises, where the ethics of patient care navigated through a fog of monetary influence. Frustrated, Dr. Sarah pondered how the system had become so inured to these unethical practices. She felt the weight of her conscience growing heavier, knowing that each day she remained silent. She was complicit in perpetuating a model that prioritized income over integrity. How had it come to this? In a domain that should centralize around compassion, the medical industry had twisted into something unrecognizable, primarily focused on the bottom line. The battle for change would not be easily won. Dr. Sarah looked around at her colleagues, some equally troubled by these revelations, while others appeared content to turn a blind eye. But neglecting to confront this distorted reality would only lead to the ongoing suffering of countless patients like Mr. Thompson, and she could no longer accept a system that demanded such sacrifices in the name of profit. The journey to restore humanity to medicine had to begin now, for the sake of her patients and for the ethical standards that should govern healthcare. Mr. Thompson had always considered himself a healthy man. At 65 years old, he enjoyed his retirement by tending to his garden, playing golf with friends, and volunteering at the local animal shelter. However, his life took an unexpected turn when he began experiencing severe chest pains. Concerned about his health, he went to the local hospital, hoping for a quick diagnosis and treatment. As he entered the hospital, a wave of anxiety washed over him. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the labyrinth of bright, fluorescent lights could be overwhelming. Mr. Thompson never imagined that this place, which he had associated with healing, would soon transform into a realm of confusion and despair. After initial tests and consultations, he was admitted for what was deemed necessary observation. This observation, however, stretched on and on. Days turned into weeks, and with every passing hour in the hospital bed, Mr. Thompson felt his spirit wane. While the nurses were kind and attentive, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was just another patient on the hospital's overflow roster, a statistic generating revenue rather than an individual needing care. The conversations he overheard among the staff only fueled his discomfort. Words like insurance reimbursement, length of stay, and profit margins echoed in his ears, making him feel more like a product than a person. During his extended stay, Mr. Thompson became increasingly frustrated. While his symptoms had improved, the hospital showed no signs of discharging him. The doctors seemed less focused on his recovery and more on prolonging his stay for financial gain. One day, Dr. Sarah entered his room as an air of palpable tension surrounded her. She was different. There was a flicker of compassion in her eyes that hinted at her struggle with the system. Mr. Thompson mustered the courage to voice his concerns. "Doctor," he said, his voice tinged with desperation, "I've been here for weeks, and I feel better now. Isn't it time for me to go home? This place? It feels more like a money machine than a hospital sometimes." Dr. Sarah looked down, guilt washing over her as she thought about the countless patients who faced similar predicaments. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your frustration, and I assure you that your well-being is my priority. But please understand, our hospital has its protocols, and they often prioritize insurance metrics over patient care." Those words stung. Mr. Thompson felt a mix of anger and sadness. "I can't help but feel like I'm trapped in here," he admitted, his voice cracking. "The longer I stay, the more it drains my financial resources, and it's affecting my family emotionally. I want to be home, enjoying my life, not lying in a hospital bed day after day." As Dr. Sarah listened, she saw clearly how the system's flaws were taking not just a toll on Mr. Thompson's health, but also on his entire existence. His fears were palpable. He felt like he was being consumed by both his illness and the hospital's profit-driven motives. It became evident to Dr. Sarah that she needed to advocate for him, and every patient like him, who had become just another cog in a machine driven by profit instead of compassion. Mr. Thompson's story was not just about illness. It was about the very essence of care and healthcare, raising important questions about the ethics of a system that often prioritized financial gain over patient well-being. His experiences prompted an awakening, not just for him, but for those who bore witness to this troubling reality. As the hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, Dr. Sarah sat alone in the staff lounge, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. The rhythmic beeping of monitors echoed through the hallway, a haunting reminder of the patients she had sworn to protect. Yet, as days turned into weeks, she found herself entangled in a web of contradictions that left her feeling increasingly disillusioned. The compassionate doctor, once filled with a profound sense of duty, now felt the weight of an uncomfortable truth pressing down on her conscience. The moments of clarity began during her rounds, where she observed the patterns that had become all too familiar. Patients were frequently kept in beds far longer than necessary, their conditions stable, yet doctors hesitated to discharge them. Instead, they became profitable assets in the sterile landscape of the hospital. Every day, Dr. Sarah watched as Mr. Thompson, a once vibrant retiree, spent yet another week in his cramped room. The machines beside him a constant reminder of his fossilized state as an inpatient. His eyes, once filled with hope, now glazed over with despair, and Sarah's heart ached for him. She recalled when she herself had been patient-centered in her approach, listening intently to their stories and allowing empathy to guide her decisions. But now, she felt as though she had been consumed by a system that equated healing with billing. The harsh reality rattled her thoughts. Was she merely a cog in the profit-driven machinery of the hospital? The nagging sensation of betrayal grew stronger with each passing day, and soon she found herself questioning her role. How could she stand by while her patients were being treated like commodities rather than individuals deserving of care? Dr. Sarah could almost hear the whispers of her own conscience urging her to take a stand. But how? The very institution that had once inspired her now seemed to be shrouded in shadows, its priorities skewed. Her awakening was ignited when she overheard a conversation between two nurses discussing the hospital's new policies regarding patient admissions. The words financial targets and insurance claims peppered their dialogue, and it struck her like a thunderbolt. These weren't just casual comments. They were a manifesto of the hospital's twisted ideology. How many more patients like Mr. Thompson would suffer while the system focused on profitability over care? That evening, as Dr. Sarah returned home, she couldn't shake off the anxiety that gnawed at her. The silent pact she had made with herself to be an advocate for healing was being tested in ways she had never anticipated. She felt an urgency to act, an obligation to transcend her fears. With her heart pounding and a resolve solidifying within her, she began to formulate a plan. Dr. Sarah knew she had to confront this ethical storm head-on. Suddenly, complacency was no longer an option, and within the depths of her being, a fire ignited. It was time to reclaim her voice, time to question the status quo and advocate for a healthcare system that prioritized compassion over profit. In the face of adversity, her awakening transformed not only her perspective, but also her commitment to her patients. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was prepared to fight for what was right. One patient at a time, Dr. Sarah paced anxiously in the hospital break room, her mind racing with thoughts of how to confront the unsettling practices she had observed. The sterile white walls felt suffocating, echoing her doubts about her ability to effect change. The hospital, once a sanctuary dedicated to healing, now felt more like a machine bent on producing profit at the expense of its patients. She had always taken pride in her work, but the realization that patients were being treated as mere revenue streams tormented her conscience. The first step in her advocacy journey involved gathering evidence. Dr. Sarah meticulously reviewed medical records, scanned through patient charts, and jotted down notes on cases that exemplified the hospital's unethical practices. She documented instances where patients were kept longer than necessary, not due to medical needs but solely to inflate the hospital's insurance reimbursements. Each case haunted her, reminding her of the faces of vulnerable patients like Mr. Thompson, who had suffered due to the hospital's financial obsession. With a folder of evidence clutched tightly in her hands, Dr. Sarah approached a few trusted colleagues. She hoped to find allies who shared her concerns about patient welfare. During their lunch break, she summoned the courage to voice her observations, presenting the data that illustrated the disconnect between patient care and profit-making. However, the responses she received were mixed. Some nodded in agreement, a glimmer of hope piercing through her anxiety, while others frowned, shaking their heads. "We can't change the system," one senior nurse lamented. "It's how things are done here." Undeterred, Dr. Sarah decided that a formal proposal was necessary. She crafted a presentation outlining the detrimental impacts of the profit-driven model on patient care, emphasizing not only the health effects but also the emotional toll on patients and their families. After spending countless nights perfecting her slides, she scheduled a meeting with the hospital's administration. As she entered the executive boardroom, she felt a whirlwind of emotions, fear, determination, and urgency colliding within her. The administration, clad in tailored suits and with polished resumes, sat back with skeptical expressions. They listened as Dr. Sarah conveyed her findings, her voice steady but her heart racing. As she spoke, she painted a picture of the patients who were suffering silently under the weight of a healthcare system that valued dollars over dignity. She urged them to consider a shift in their priorities, to think about the legacy they wanted to leave behind as healers rather than businessmen. However, resistance surged swiftly. The chief financial officer interjected, questioning Dr. Sarah's data and dismissing her concerns as naive. "We are running a business," she argued, "and every hospital in the country operates this way." Dr. Sarah's heart sank, but she refused to back down. She realized in that moment that the struggle to advocate for her patients was more significant than she had initially understood. It was a battle against an entrenched system, and she wasn't alone. Other colleagues began to chime in, sharing their experiences and echoing her sentiments. In that pivotal moment, a sense of camaraderie blossomed. Dr. Sarah knew this was only the beginning of a long and daunting journey toward reform. The path ahead would be riddled with challenges, but she had ignited a spark of collective awareness. Together, they could push back against the looming shadows of profit-driven care and fight for the compassionate healthcare system their patients desperately needed. Dr. Sarah's determination to advocate for her patients grew stronger as the days went by. The unsettling reality of profit-driven practices in her hospital was more than just a concern. It was a call to action. Recognizing that her voice alone would not be enough to instigate real change, she decided to rally support from her colleagues and the patients themselves. One evening, after her shift, Dr. Sarah organized a small gathering in the hospital's break room. She invited a few trusted nurses and fellow physicians who she knew shared her concerns. As they gathered around a table filled with coffee and pastries, Dr. Sarah began to speak passionately about her observations. Every day, I see patients who are kept in their beds longer than necessary, not because they need to be here, but because the hospital benefits financially from their extended stays, she stated, her voice steady yet filled with urgency. The room fell silent as her words sunk in. The nurses exchanged worried glances, and Dr. James, a seasoned surgeon with years of experience, finally spoke up. I've seen it too, Sarah. We're sacrificing our patients' well-being for the sake of profit. But what can we do? The management won't listen to us. Dr. Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing with both fear and hope. We need to make noise. If enough of us come together, we can demand change. We can start a movement to advocate for our patients and expose these practices to the public. Slowly, the group nodded in agreement, realizing that they were not alone in their concerns. Over the following weeks, they began to gather evidence of the hospital's practices, testimonies from patients like Mr. Thompson, who had endured unnecessary procedures, and documentation of cases where patients were kept on expensive 4 drips long after they were medically needed. Dr. Sarah initiated a patient care coalition, bringing together medical staff, patients, and their families. They established a meeting structure, using their combined experiences to highlight the urgency of the situation. With each meeting, their resolve strengthened, and their approach became more organized. They created a pamphlet titled Healing, Not Profiteering that outlined the ethical obligations of healthcare providers, emphasizing the importance of placing patient care above financial incentives. During this process, Dr. Sarah also encouraged patients to share their stories on social media, using platforms to raise awareness. Video testimonials began to circulate, and soon, the hashtag #HealthcareNotProfits gained traction, drawing the attention of local news outlets who began to report on the issue. As the coalition grew, so did the support from the community. Families of patients, who had previously felt powerless, began to voice their concerns, joining Dr. Sarah in demanding accountability from hospital management. The once solitary struggle transformed into a collective movement, amplifying their voices. This newfound solidarity gave Dr. Sarah hope. She realized that together they could make a difference. They were not merely a group of disgruntled employees. They were advocates for compassion in medicine, determined to restore integrity to their profession. Armed with data, testimonies, and a growing public outcry, they prepared to present their findings to the hospital board, a moment that could reshape the narrative of healthcare at their institution and perhaps even beyond. The air in the hospital's conference room crackled with tension as Dr. Sarah stood at the front, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls echoed with the hushed conversations of the hospital board members, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and defensiveness. Today, as she stared down at the neatly arranged notes, she knew she was about to confront not just her superiors, but an entire system that had begun to feel like an insatiable beast, devouring the very essence of patient care. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today," she began. forcing her voice to remain steady despite the rising tide of anxiety. I am here to discuss the practices that I believe compromise the ethical standards of our institution and, more importantly, the well-being of our patients. Her gaze flickered across the room, landing on the faces of familiar colleagues who had once shared her idealism and passion for healing. As she continued, Sarah illustrated her points with real-life examples. Take Mr. Thompson, for instance. He was admitted for a routine procedure but ended up staying 3 weeks longer than necessary due to repeated tests and consultations that yielded no new information. His health deteriorated, his family's finances strained, and his spirit crushed. He is not a statistic. He is a human being in the care of this hospital. Murmurs rippled through the room, some in agreement while others bristled. Dr. Legrand, the chief administrator, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed defiantly. Dr. Sarah, I appreciate your passion, but you must understand the financial implications. Hospitals are running on very thin margins. The insurance companies dictate our actions. We have a duty to our patients, she countered, her voice rising as her frustration mounted. We're not here to turn hospital beds into profit machines. Each day I see patients being treated as numbers rather than individuals. The insurance models incentivize longer stays. But at what cost? Are we sacrificing our patients' health for the sake of revenue? The room fell silent. Dr. Sarah felt the weight of her words pressing against her, urging her to push forward. I am not asking for a complete overhaul of the system, but for a small, yet significant change. Let's prioritize our patients' health over profits. We could implement protocols to ensure that every patient is discharged when they are truly ready, focusing on the care they receive rather than the billing codes we submit. Dr. Legrand finally spoke, his tone laced with skepticism. And if it affects our bottom line, what then? You are aware of the financial pressures we face. This is not just about ethics. It's also a matter of survival for the institution. Survival, she echoed, her heart racing. What kind of survival is it if we strip away our humanity in the process? If we lose our ethical compass, we risk losing everything that makes us who we are as healthcare providers. Would you rather be known for your profits or for saving lives? The tension in the room shifted, eyes darting between Dr. Sarah and Dr. Legrand. Slowly, other medical staff began to voice their agreement, a ripple of support growing among them, a collective decision to stand for what was right. In that moment, Dr. Sarah realized she had sparked something within her colleagues, an awakening that transcended profit margins and institutional constraints. As the meeting wore on, debates ignited, and Dr. Sarah stood resolute, ready to battle for a system that adhered to its core values, compassion and care intertwined with ethics, where patients would never again be seen as mere tools of profit. It was a step into the unknown, but she felt the fire of purpose burn within her. Today marked the beginning of her fight against the corruption in healthcare. Her voice would be heard. After the intense confrontation with the hospital's management, Dr. Sarah felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The battle was far from over, but she had ignited a spark within her colleagues and patients alike. The administration, confronted with the evidence of the unethical practices and the rising discontent among the staff, begrudgingly agreed to address the systemic issues. They organized workshops to discuss best practices in patient care, emphasizing the ethical principles that should govern their work. Despite the challenges, the response was promising. Several colleagues, inspired by Dr. Sarah's courage, decided to join her cause. Together, they initiated a patient advocacy group within the hospital, dedicated to ensuring that the rights and well-being of patients were upheld. Their tireless efforts began to change the culture within the hospital, a shift from profit-driven motives to patient-centered care. Patients like Mr. Thompson saw a change too. His experience in the hospital transformed as the staff's attitudes shifted towards genuine concern for their well-being. In time, the hospital began to prioritize shorter, more effective treatments and to keep open lines of communication with patients about their care plans. The focus moved towards actual health outcomes rather than maximizing insurance profits, a new era in healthcare that valued life and dignity over dollars. Reflecting on her journey, Dr. Sarah remembered the initial reasons she became a doctor: the desire to heal, to provide comfort, and to advocate for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. The experience had reinforced her belief that compassion must be at the heart of medicine. However, she knew that this was just the beginning. The healthcare system was deeply intertwined with financial motives, and while her hospital had begun to change, many others still operated under the old paradigm. Dr. Sarah vowed to continue her advocacy beyond the walls of her institution, speaking at conferences and engaging with policymakers to promote ethical healthcare practices across the system. Her story serves as a reminder that every healthcare professional has a role to play in advocating for patients. It is essential to recognize and challenge the profit-driven motives that can compromise care. The team's success also underscored the importance of unity. When individuals come together for a common cause, they can create significant change. As we conclude this tale, we are left with a profound moral that the essence of healthcare lies in compassion and ethical practice, and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. It is our shared responsibility to advocate for a system that places people before profit. What are your thoughts on Dr. Sarah's journey? Do you believe change is possible in today's healthcare system? We encourage you to share your reflections in the comments below. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking tales that shine a light on social issues. Together, let's continue the conversation about compassion in healthcare